And yes, it is recorded. Yes, okay. And actually, this is going to be my final year at Sophia. I'm 72 years old now, so I will be retiring at the end of this academic year. I will probably be staying with Sophia, doing odds and ends for them, but I won't be teaching anymore. As far as this academic year has been concerned, I think this is true of most of you as well. Everything has been online. All my courses have been online. All my meetings have been online, basically. This is actually only the second time that I've been asked to give a lecture this term. Everything else has been canceled. And the last time I gave a presentation was in May, and this was for an elementary school. And, you know, when you have elementary schools and it's a public school, it's very difficult to do something online. So I had to go actually to the school to do the teacher training for them. Otherwise, it's always, everything else has been online so far. My final year at Sophia, final year of teaching, and I didn't expect this to happen. But it's been a great experience in a sense. A lot of things that I have been doing in the past, I can't do this year. And so it's been fun to a certain extent. I feel very sorry for the freshmen, however. I have approximately 185 students in one of my classes, and approximately one half are freshmen. They haven't been able to come on campus yet. They haven't, many of them, 1/3 of my students in my class live outside of Tokyo. And so they really haven't been able to come to Tokyo at all during that period. And so it's very difficult to try to get them interested in what is happening at Sophia, the topic of my talk, my course and so forth. So I try as much as possible to break them up into groups, break up sessions, and also I try to get them to do, I always reserve at least 10 minutes at the end of the class for individual questions for anybody who wants to stay on. And it's very interesting. You have one student, you know, remaining behind and asking a question. And I also see about 4 or 5 other names on the screen. And so I assume that the other students were going to be asking questions too. But then the interesting thing is, this one person finishes his question and says, "Thank you, Professor." And then everybody else simply says, "Thank you, Professor," and they're all gone. So it seems that the other students really simply wanted to see what I would say or how I would answer to this one student who was asking the question. That's fun though. But the only other thing that's really frustrating is that it's, you know, basically everybody is shuts down their videos. And so I don't know who I'm talking to. And unless I have a show of hands like this, you know, I don't know what's happening. So, so I always get them to use the icons because I want to get at least some feedback. And that, yes, at least so far it's been working. I don't know how it's going to be with you, but as you probably know, in Tokyo, things aren't really going very well. We're heading in the wrong direction right now. And so probably this week, the university will announce that basically all our classes will be held online again in the fall, except for some seminars and experiments that the students have to do for their graduation research and so forth. Other than that, lectures basically will all be conducted online again in the fall term. So what we're doing now is trying to gather materials, information from all our teachers to see what the problems they felt were in conducting the classes online this term. And we want to try to revise that and to make it better for the fall term. So anyway, that's my situation, our situation at Sophia at the present time. And so today, what I'd like you to do, I'll share my slides with you. Okay. So what I'm going to do today is I'll be talking about some of the basic concepts which are being considered for the new course of study and how that can be, that those ideas might be implemented in the classroom to make our classes more active and enlivening. And hopefully, I'd like you to take part in some of them. Just it's very difficult to break you up into the breakout groups because you don't have any materials with you. So I'm going to be doing basically with everybody together. But I will be asking you to participate as we go along. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is people very often talk about the fact that the Japanese know a lot of grammar, know how to read, and so forth, but they are very reluctant to speak, and they do not really have much confidence in speaking English. And a lot of people mention different reasons for that, but there are at least several reasons that I have seen, have talked to people, and have come up with. One is, of course, this emphasis that they place on accuracy of form, which means that unless they feel that they are correct in everything that they say, they won't be able to open their mouth. So they don't want to make mistakes. That's the one it's a very clear phenomena that I see in many of the Japanese, not just the students, but also teachers. Actually, I think this is more true of teachers than students sometimes, because as I show a little later on, it seems that they feel that because they are teachers of English, they have to be correct all the time. Another is the overemphasis on so-called native English, especially in terms of pronunciation. Then again, you ask the Japanese who they think is a native speaker of English, and you know that a very general kind of an answer comes out, like Americans and British and people who were born with English as a first language. But then we all know that there are so many different varieties of English around the world, and so they really can't say this is the model English, and yet they're looking for that though. They're looking for that. And if you take a look at listen to the CDs which are attached to the textbooks, it's basically 90% American English, you know. So they feel that it's, you know, American English is the so-called native English that they should be acquiring, they should be using. All right, that's unfortunate, but that's the reality of the situation that we have here. And of course, this is very similar to the overemphasis on the accuracy of form, but this idea of the fear of making mistakes. I mean, they can't make a fool of themselves in front of their students. Many of the teachers would feel that way, and they just don't want to make mistakes. Now, when I was studying at the University of Michigan, I was teaching at the English Language Institute as a graduate student, as a TA. And we had a lot of students from all over the world attending the 2-month English intensive English sessions there. And in 1977, I think it was, a group of Japanese junior high school teachers came to the University of Michigan, to the ELI, the English Language Institute, during the summer for an intensive course. And these Japanese teachers were not necessarily teachers of English, but they were teachers of other subjects as well. But there were, of course, the largest number were teachers who were teaching English. Okay, and I found it very interesting because, you know, a lot of the Japanese teachers would, for example, go to Ann Arbor. They went to the restaurants and they went to the bars at night, and they would be drinking and they would be eating and they would be making friends with the local people and other foreign students who were also studying at the institute. But then I noticed at one time that the people who really went out there actively to get in touch with the local people were not necessarily teachers of English. They were teachers of other subjects like social studies and so forth. And of course, their English was not perfect. I mean, it was full of mistakes. Their pronunciation sometimes was not very intelligible, and yet they were there and they were having fun. They were making friends. And I found these Japanese teachers of English not going out to the city with them that much. And there were, of course, some who actually did, but there were quite a few who did not. And it was interesting because one day an American TA who was teaching also at the university, at the ELI, asked one of the Japanese English teachers what he taught in Japan. So he said, "So what do you teach in Japan?" And this Japanese teacher was a teacher of English, but he hesitated and he said, "I teach Japanese." Unfortunate, but that's the truth. I asked, I was a little surprised, but then I found out that there were other teachers who also said, "I teach PE instead of teach English." And there was another female teacher back here in Japan. I was talking to her and she said, I was asked the same question, but at that time, my daughter was with me, and she said, this American asked me what I taught in Japan, and she wanted to say music, but because her daughter was with her, she couldn't say music, and so she had to say English. But when she said English, she said, she felt embarrassed. And the main reason is because she felt that her English was not good enough to merit the title of a teacher of English, I guess. Right? And this is something that does seem to happen a lot. I mean, many of the Japanese teachers of English have this native English complex. They have this idea that this is the kind of pronunciation you have to use. This is the grammar. You can't make any mistakes. And if you made any mistakes because you're supposed to be a professional in teaching English, you're a failure. Now, that sort of a negative feeling seems to be behind a lot of this. Things are changing now a lot. I'm talking about 40 years ago. So now things have changed, at least somewhat. Maybe not 100%, but it has, I think, been changing, especially among the younger people. Okay, now when we look at the different kinds of approaches and methods for teaching English around the world, this was a diagram made by Professor Ikeda at Sophia. And I think it's a very succinct and a well summarized diagram. And as you see from the left-hand side, you have the EFL environment. This is the English as a foreign language environment, like Japan and China and Korea, where English is not used in society outside of the classroom. And then here, there is a large section where now the boundary is becoming very blurred in a sense. Even in Japan, things are blurring a lot. It used to be almost 100% EFL country, but with the number of foreign people coming to Japan and the amount of English being used in Japan, there are people who say, well, Japan maybe is changing into an ESL context as well. English is a second language, at least in certain places, not all around the country, but in certain places. And I think that is true. Okay. And then, of course, at the right-hand side, you have the ESL environment, which is the English as a second language environment. And this is an environment where English is spoken outside of the classroom. It's used for everyday communication purposes. Now, within this diagram, where does Japan's English education belong? It belongs basically right here. We have been using the GT, which is the grammar translation method, and the audiolingual method for the past 60, 70 years after the Second World War. Well, the grammar translation method goes back way before that as well. But the audiolingual method came with the end of the Second World War and with the introduction of the audiolingual approach. And both of these, however, are, if you take a look at the philosophy behind the creation of the methods, it's structure-based. It's structure-based. You might think that the audiolingual is more conversational-based and so forth, but not necessarily so, because if you take a look at it, the main purpose of the audiolingual method is to try to get the students to acquire an automatic ability to use the structures of English correctly. And that's why you have so much mimicry, memorization, and pattern practice. And so when we were doing pattern practice, when I was teaching pattern practice, for example, we tried to make the content as easy as possible so that the students would not be uh, bothered by the meaning of the sentence. We wanted them to practice the form as much as possible without having to consider meaning that much. So as Leonard Bloomfield used to say, learning is overlearning. All right, learning a language is overlearning a language. That's how much practice was necessary. And basically the practice was to try to get the students to automatize the structure so that they would not have to think about the structure when they were actually conversing. In other words, they could now focus on the meaning without having to focus on the structure. The problem, however, was that the practice was all based on trying to get the students to acquire accuracy in the structure of the language. And so the grammar translation, of course, is quite different from the audiolingual in the sense that it uses Japanese or the native language of the learner, and the audiolingual method does not do that. But still, the basic philosophy behind the creation of these methods was structural syllabus. Then we have what's called the weak version of the communicative language teaching methods. Probably the most common teaching method is the PPP, presentation, presentation, practice, and presentation. No, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Presentation, practice, and production. Okay, so PPP is presentation, production, and practice. Right here, production. Here, it began to move away from the audiolingual in the sense that they were saying, now what's more important than simply learning the structure is learning how to communicate in the language, which is more important. However, the basis of this was first get the structure correct. Get the presentation of the structure, get the students to understand it, get them to practice it through pattern practice and other kinds of drills, and then apply that to a conversational or communicative situation. So the PPP was also basically a structurally based kind of approach. But then more recently, things have changed quite a lot because people are now beginning to say that it's more important to focus more on the meaning and the task of communication itself than on trying to get everybody to produce accurate forms. Now, one of the basic ideas behind that is the inductive learning of language, which means that accuracy comes at the end of the learning process, not at the beginning of the learning process. But as people communicate, they will try to modify their language. That's what SLA tries to do with Michael Long and all these people. They modify their language as much as possible to try to get the other person to understand. So the best input is produced in the context of interaction. So interaction gives us the context in which to improve our language. And so even if we start with poor pronunciation, if we try as much as possible to get the other person to understand what we're trying to say, the pronunciation begins to become more intelligible than in the beginning. And I think this is true. This is something that happens. And so there's more emphasis placed on the actual task of communication and the content of what is being said. And hopefully the form of the language will become more accurate as time goes along. And so in the weak version, you start with the accuracy, and then you practice that as much as possible, and then you bring that into the communication area. But here, you begin with the communication, and then try to get the students to end up acquiring accuracy in the language forms. And so this was the CLT idea, and this is the kind of idea which is basically which underlies the creation of the new course of study that we have actually created for which just started this year. And then we also have another step in the right-hand direction, and that is CLIO, or Content and Language Integrated Learning. Very often, what this is it's basically a content-based kind of approach. And so whatever language is taught will be based on how to communicate the content effectively. So again, this is very closely tied up with the CLT strong version. Okay, so we don't start with the form of the language. Sometimes we do if we are clear about the content. We know exactly what it is that we will be teaching our students. Then we'll say, okay, let's give the students some practice in the forms, vocabulary, and so forth, which they will be using when they talk about the content. So there might be some teaching of form before the actual content-based instruction, but it will all be based on what they will be using, that we'll be studying in the content-based instruction. So these two are very strongly related to each other. Of course, there are also immersion programs, about 5 or 6 here in Japan at the present time. Some of them are very, very successful. Others still very much struggling to try to make it successful. But there are some very successful immersion programs in Japan at the present time as well. All right, so that's basically where we are. So it was structure-based in the early stages. Now things are changing to a more communication-based kind of syllabus. So this is more important than the structure. Structure will come with if we are able to communicate well. Then the structure will become more accurate. So that's the kind of a very general kind of a picture that we have at the present time. Now let's take a look at this structural syllabus on which all of the course of study has been based from the end of the Second World War all the way up to this time, 70 years. From the very beginning in 1947, when the draft of the first course of study was created, the content which was written was to teach all 4 skills. And it says that translation is not the ultimate goal. And this was way back in 1947. That's even back then. The goal of which was set in the course of study was to teach all the 4 skills. Okay, and the ultimate goal was to try to get the students to think in English. And this is also written in that document as well. And so it was very progressive in that sense. But the basic idea was first, let's teach the pronunciation, let's teach the grammar, let's teach the structures of the language and the vocabulary and so forth, which will be necessary for communication. And this had to be done before the actual communication process was thought to be possible. So people believe that you had to have the forms of the language first. You have to acquire that first, and then you go on to the production. So the course of study consisted of pronunciation, letters and marks, words, vocabulary, idiomatic expressions, and sentence structures. And these were all the elements which were used in constructing the course of study. Although, as I said, when you take a look at, for example, the objectives, it says the objective is to get the students to speak, to listen, to read, to write, to use all 4 skills. Still underlying all that was the basic learning of the structure of the language. That was considered to be essential. Now, after that, in the 1970s, for example, after Chomsky came onto the scene, people began, well, Chomsky, of course, criticized the audiolingual approach, and basically because it was based on behaviorism. And his ideas were culminated in what you might call the cognitive code learning theory, which said that, after all, structure is important, that it should be understood, not just memorized, but understood. And it had to be taught explicitly in a sense. Some people used to call this the grammar translation approach. But the difference was that there was a lot more cognitive thinking which was required in trying to understand the structure of the sentences. Now, this didn't last that long. After that, after the audiolingual approach, which said simply learning the structure, the grammar, and so forth is not that important, new ideas began to come in, which leads to the present way of teaching English. However, this audiolingualism, this tradition, has had a very strong influence, and it has lasted for a long period of time. And probably most of you know of these different kinds of pattern practice drills, repetition drills, and substitution drills, transformation drills, expansion drills, completion drills, just to give you an idea. All right. Whether you turn on your mic or not, it doesn't matter. Just, try this out with me. All right, so a substitution drill. So the first sentence is, it's a cat. All right, now I'm going to change the word, and I want you to say it. I can't hear anybody.
It's a dog.
Okay,
It's a dog.
all right. At least I hear some people. Okay, good. The next one.
It's a cow.
Cow.
It's a cow. Very good. Okay, so, and?
A bird.
It's a bird. Okay. Now this is simply practicing the form, right? Now here's another one, transformation drills. You have the dog chases the cat. So change number to plural.
Dogs chase the
Dogs
cats.
chase the cats.
All right, dogs chase the cat. Or the dog chases the cats, well, whichever. But in this case, I was thinking of the subject, okay? Change the subject to the plural. All right, the next one. Change the original sentence to yes, no interrogative. Question form.
Does the dog chase the cat?
Yes, no.
The dog chasing the cat?
Is
the dog,
Is the dog chasing the cat?
right. Does the dog chase the cat, right? Yes, no interrogative. Okay? And the next one. Negative.
The dog doesn't chase the cat.
Right, the dog doesn't chase the cat. Okay? And passive.
Cat is chased by the dog.
Okay, the cat is chased by the dog. Now, these were the kinds of exercises that we had to do. I remember doing this in the language labs many decades ago. And we had to do tons of these exercises. And as we were doing this, it's a dog, it's a cat, it's a cow, it's a bird. I wasn't thinking of cats and dogs and cows and birds. I was just trying to make sure that I was able to use the structure correctly. And when it came to these grammatical transformation drills, it's simply enough. I mean, I was trying to make sure I knew the grammar and I was able to transform it. There's another one, expansion drill, okay? So the original is, it's a cat. Now add the next word. Go ahead.
Big cat.
It's a big cat, all right? Now add very.
It's a very big
Very
cat.
big cat.
It's a very big cat. This is called expansion drill. Another expansion drill, all right? I go to school, add this.
I
Go to
go,
Go to school by bicycle.
Okay, add this.
I go to
Well, bicycle at 8 o'clock.
All right, I go to school by bicycle at 8 o'clock. Now add this.
I go to school by bicycle at 8 o'clock every morning.
Right. Is that fun? At least it gets you to think a little bit. Yeah, but it doesn't really force you to think of the meaning very much. Huh? You're simply trying to make sure that the structure is correct. Okay, and
I feel like that would really help me in my Japanese study, actually. I feel like that would be really useful for me.
But it's probably because you're using Japanese to an extent in real life.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So a lot of Japanese students are not using English at all.
Right.
And suddenly they come with this.
Right.
And it doesn't really make sense. But the teachers are trying to get the students to get these right. Huh? And so this had to be rhythmical. The students had to do it, one after the other, real quickly. Okay. Now, this was a way to try to get the students to acquire the structure. And this was all within the so-called, there are a few more, the so-called audiolingual approach. All right. So now I want you to complete the sentence. Okay. I'm going to play baseball. Go ahead.
I'm going to watch television.
I'm going to watch television.
I'm going to see a movie.
I'm going to see a movie.
I'm going to do my homework.
I'm going to do my homework. Okay, so I'm going to. So be going to is the structure that you're practicing here. As you can see, the phrases and the words that come right after it are simple. Why? Because you don't want the students to start thinking, what does that word mean? So the words have to be simple because you want the students to concentrate on the structure, okay? Another completion, this is conversational, okay? So how are you? I'm fine. How are you?
Tired.
I'm tired. How are you?
I'm hungry.
I'm hungry, and that's it, huh? Okay, so these were basically examples of, the so-called uh, pattern practice, or the audiolingual method, okay? Now, this was probably the most common way of trying to get the students to acquire English structure, especially up until about the 1970s or so. Maybe even today, people might be using it. But then way back in 1979, John Lamandela, I actually went to hear his talk at the TESOL conference way back. This was when I was still at the University of Michigan. And his presentation was really interesting. And right after that, he came up with this article. And it was called The Neurofunctional Basis of Pattern Practice. And his main idea was he had the subjects wear these little caps on their heads, and these were supposed to measure the flow of the blood in your brain, which says that if the blood was flowing, that you were actively using that part of the brain. Okay, so they had these little helmets or whatever that they had to wear, and he had the subjects do pattern practice like the ones that you just did. Okay, and he wanted to see where in the brain the blood would be flowing the most, what part of the brain would be used the most. And what he found was that when you were doing pattern practice, that the Broca's area or the motor area of the brain was really being activated. So the motor area was being activated so that this would control the muscles of your mouth and so forth, and you would be producing the sounds. The point that he noted was that when he looked at the Wernicke's area, which is a comprehension area of the brain, it was basically blue, and there wasn't much blood being uh, passed through that section. And what he concluded from that was that as far as this using pattern practice and so forth was concerned, it does help the motor part of the brain to really activate itself, and you do get to acquire automaticity in the use of it. But the use of that structure was not really disconnected from the meaning of the language. And so you could be doing pattern practice. You know, this is a dog, this is a cat, this is a bird, and at the same time, you'd be saying to yourself, what am I going to eat for lunch? So you could be thinking of something else, but your mouth would be moving. And this is actually what Lamandela found. Okay, so he said that L1 acquisition and L2 acquisition, where language is acquired for the purpose of communication, is not the same as foreign language learning, which he termed as the audiolingual approach at that time. So what he said was pattern practice does not lead to the acquisition of language. It helps the structure to become automatic, but it doesn't really connect meaning and the forms of a language. So simply practicing the forms is not enough. Right, so I want you to think with me, how can you make the previous exercises more meaningful and interesting? So that it will not be simply practicing the form, but will lead to acquisition. Okay, let's do this. Any suggestions? How would you do this in a different way? It's a cat, and you had dog. It's a dog. A cow, and it's a bird. How do you think this? You can change this a little bit so that the students will be able to connect the structure with meaning. Any ideas? Yeah, go ahead.
You make the student want to find out what it is. So
Okay,
somehow it's hidden from the student and they want to know what it is.
Okay, so how would you get the students to do that?
You could do pair practice, and something's hidden from one and the other one knows it. That might be one way of doing it.
Okay, so that would be hiding what?
Hiding the cat or the dog or whatever the animal is hidden.
Okay,
the
so
the question has to be a certain question form and answer form has to be used. But the actual object, one student knows, the other student doesn't know, and hopefully the one who doesn't know is curious. and has
Okay,
that
so what you
incentive.
okay, so what you're saying is basically you have to have some kind of an object, like a dog.
In this case, in this particular sentence, yes. Yeah, I guess
Okay.
so. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other ideas? I guess, I mean, having an actual object is the best way to get the students to connect these structures and these words with meaning, right? And so if you just change this to, let's do the same exercise. So it's a cat. Now, all right, now, what's the answer?
It's a dog.
It's a dog. And
It's a cow.
it's a cow. All right, and
It's
a bird.
it's a bird. Good. In other words, getting the students to at least connect the structure and the words with meaning. One of the best and the easiest way to do it is to connect it with actual pictures and objects and so forth. And that's where the meaning is. Actually, this dog used to be my dog. He passed away. But anyway, using pictures is probably one of the most the common ways to try to get the students to connect the form that they are supposed to acquire with the meaning that is attached to it. Now, I don't know. Okay. Now, I don't know what to do with the transformation drills. Anybody have any idea of making this interesting or trying to get the students to really an exercise, right? So you don't want to explain it too much. You want to try to get the students to do some kind of a practice, but how can you do this in a meaningful way? I can't use pictures here. Any ideas? To be honest with you, I don't have any idea. So whenever we come, one of the best things to do if you have a transformation drill like this is to put it in context in a longer sentence or a discourse, and then try to get the students to do it, these exercises, these drills, to match the context of the discourse in which these structures appear. That's probably the only thing that I can really think of at the present time. But how about this one? So completion, all right? All right, so I want you to answer the questions again. I'm going to, go ahead.
Play baseball. I'm going to
Okay,
play
I'm going to play baseball, all right? I'm going to, whoops.
going to watch TV.
I'm going to watch television, good. And then?
Going to the movies.
Yeah, I'm going to see a movie, okay? And this is cute.
I'm going to do my homework.
That's right, I'm going to do my homework, okay? All right, so again, this is easy enough because it's possible to bring in pictures, things that do reflect the meaning of the exercise. Huh? How about the simple conversation? How are you? And so this will be, I'm fine. Okay, and how are you?
I'm tired.
I'm tired. And how are you?
I'm hungry.
I am hungry. Right. Again, you can use pictures. So it's easy enough to try to get these structures to become more meaningful for students if we are able to find some way of connecting the form with the meaning that the structures represent. Okay. Now that's probably a more realistic way of trying to teach these structures. And I think it's possible to do that. However, in the new course of study, we have made some major changes, and that is we have gone away from the so-called structural syllabus, and we have gone into the area of what you might call the communicative syllabus or communicative way of teaching English. And underlying the new course of study is the Common European Framework of Reference, the CEFR. And this is a framework which talks about what people can do at a certain level. Okay, so if you're at the A1 level, what things are you capable of doing? At the A2 level, B1, B2, C1, C2. There are 6 basic levels. Now with the new revision of it, the last year in March, a companion came out, and that now has subdivided these into A1, and that's about subdivided into two, A2 subdivided into two, and so forth. Now, we've been doing that here in Japan all along. So the CFR Japan version already had the A1 divided into two levels, A2 into two levels, and so forth. Now, this is very unique because what this says is it's not really that important simply to get the students to acquire the form of the language, okay? It does not assume the attainment of native speaker-like forms of the language. That's not the major goal. The major goal is to see how well the student can use the language to satisfy his or her needs for practical purposes. And the levels are basically, this is the original level, A level divided into A1, A2. As I said, this is now subdivided into A11, A12, A21, A22, and so forth. So you have the A level, which is the basic user, the B level, the independent user, and the C level, which is considered to be the proficient user. If you sort of do a very, very rough match with the A-Ken, the step test, the A1 level will be around A-Ken Sankyu, the third grade. A2 will be Jun-Nikyu, B1 Nikyu, B2 Jun-Ikkyu, and C will be Ikkyu. Around basically, all right? It's not exactly the same, but that's what it will look like. Now, what do these look like, right? If you start from the very bottom, as you can see, each of these levels starts with can understand, can understand, can do, can do, can do. So it's not what they know, but what they can do, the students can do, which is set as the goal. Okay, so at the A1 level, at the very basic level, the students can understand and use familiar everyday expressions and very basic, because I can't see it. Okay, basic phrases aimed at the satisfaction of needs of a concrete type and so forth. Now at the very top, C2, which is very proficient. This is the top level. And one thing I'd like you to note is here. The person can understand with ease virtually everything heard or read, can summarize information from different spoken and written sources, reconstructing arguments and accounts in a coherent presentation, can express himself or herself spontaneously, very fluently and precisely, differentiating finer shades of meaning even in more complex situations, which is a very high level. But one thing to note here is it doesn't say like a native speaker. There is no mention of a native speaker in the CFR. And that's one of the most important points of the CFR criteria. It does not assume that a person has to be like a native speaker. There is no mention of a native speaker. It's what the person can do using the language which is more important. Okay, and another important point is what a person can do has to be done in a certain context. And that's, oh, I'm sorry. Here you have the general CFR levels broken up into the listening, readings, spoken interactions, spoken production, and writing. And by the way, in the CFR, speaking is divided into two sections, spoken interaction and production, which is basically giving speeches and so forth. Okay, and this is all divided into the A1, A2, and so forth. And this goes all the way up. So if you take a look at all of these, you can get all these down from the European Council, free of charge. You can download the whole thing. And as you can see, all of these says, I can do this, but nowhere does it say that I am like a native speaker. Okay, it says what you can do, what the person can do using language is the most important thing. And that's what we have taken as the basis for the creation of the new course of study. Okay, so we're not going to be as interested or as emphasizing as much as we have been in the past on the forms of the language and the accuracy of the language, because that hasn't really got us very far in getting the students to actually use English in real context. Okay, so you have all of these. These are all in the A1 all the way up to C2 sections. Okay. Now, this is something that I have sort of created to try to make the content a little easier, hopefully, to understand. You have the CFR levels A, B, and C. A is the basic level, the independent user, and this is the proficient user, C. And at the very basic level, the content that the people, the students will be expected to talk about will be themselves, like giving their names, self-introductions, talking about their likes and dislikes, and so forth. All right, so that's very simple. All right. And then it's basically, and then they go on to talk about their immediate environment, their families, their friends, their school. And gradually, as they go on to the B level, they go on from their schools to their neighborhoods, to their cities, to their country, which is Japan. They go on to talk about society as a whole. And so the range of content ranges from the self, it gradually expands to the very immediate environment, then goes on to more social environments. And if students are able to talk about different aspects of these different topics, then we assume that they will be able to use English for a more practical purpose. Now, as they are talking about these things, what's going to happen is that their language forms, their can-do expressions are going to be advancing from more very concrete things like my name is, my hobby is, all the way up to more abstract things like I believe or I think, um, I don't agree, I agree, and so forth. All right. So more abstract expressions will be necessary in order to talk about uh, the higher levels of this CFR content. At the C level, what I am basically suggesting is that now, although people have been talking about international or global, I think it's time to start talking about something a little beyond that. We don't really know what global is anyway. And so I'm basically trying to emphasize more the importance of the so-called sustainable goals of our world, of our society, and trying to get our students to be able to talk about the environment, talk about gender problems, talk about peace and war, and so forth. The 17 goals that are set by the UN, for example. If this is possible, then I believe that this is these are topics which can be talked about not only among the Japanese, but with students from all different parts of the world. And that's where we want our students to go. And so I tend to see a lot of topics and themes for the debates and also for speech contests at the senior high school and college levels, which are basically in this area of sustainable societies and what can be done about that. And I think that's a good thing to do, okay? And so using this as the content model and using this as what they can do with that content, putting these two together is what is required in the new course of study. So let's go on now just simply to talk about the more concrete ideas of the course of study. Here you have the three basic principles which have been included this time. At the very top is something called Manabi ni mukau chikara ningen-sei. Now this is, in English, it would be something like the development of the strength and the human character to learn by themselves autonomously and to develop a higher sense of confidence among themselves, among the young people. And in order to do that, it's assumed that if they are able to find more confidence in themselves, higher self-esteem, that they will be able to deal with the world and society around them in more active ways. Now, in order to do that, the new course of study has divided the what should be learned into two different areas. One is the knowledge and skills, chishiki-gino. These are the things which are necessary. And basically, these are things which belong to the more traditional the structural syllabus. This is where the students have to learn the grammar, the vocabulary, the pronunciation, and so forth. And however, the Japanese have been learning this for the past 70 years, and they really haven't been able to become confident in their use of language. They have not really been able to communicate with people outside of Japan. And so for the new course of study, people have said, now we need to be able to get the students to use that knowledge for a more practical purpose. And that's where you have this koryoku, handan ryoku, hyogen ryoku to. In other words, this knowledge has to be used to think, to make decisions, and to express ideas. Okay, so these are the things which are required. Now, in terms of cognitive psychology, for example, you might call this section on the left-hand side simply knowing something, having declarative knowledge, being able to define things, to talk about things is not enough. What is important is to try to bring this knowledge to a procedural knowledge level where you no longer have to think about the actual definitions of the declarative knowledge, but you are able to use it to think. Use the knowledge to make decisions. Use the knowledge to express oneself. Now, if you take a look at the new course of study, okay, so before we go on to that, again, I'd like you to try this out a minute, okay? And that is, I'm going to give you a set of grammar questions, and I want you to try to come up with the answer, okay? So here are the questions. Fill in the blanks with the correct grammatical forms. Let's start with A. Huh? I wish I could. I could stay, but I can't. The second one, I working on the painting for all week, but I'm still not done.
Have been.
I have been, okay, working on the painting all week, but I'm still not done. And the last one, I able to go with him if I caught the flu then.
I would be able to go with him if I hadn't caught the flu.
Right, I would have been able to go with him if I had not caught it, right? Hadn't caught the flu. This is what the Japanese students are forced to do. This is all based on what you might call the structural syllabus. So what you're doing is you're trying to acquire the structure. Make sure you understand the structure, okay? This is, if you can answer these questions, you have declarative knowledge. You have knowledge of the grammar, okay? You can probably, and if the teacher says, why did you put could in there? You could probably explain it to a certain extent. Now, as far as the procedural knowledge is concerned, it looks something like this. Now, here is a sentence, okay? It's a beautiful morning. The sun is shining. This is a paragraph. The sun is shining and the temperature is nice and warm. I wish I could stay at home and spend the day playing with my children. Unfortunately, I have to go to work to finish the project I've been working on all week. I would have been able to finish it yesterday if it hadn't been for the sudden emergency call we got from an old lady who was having problems with her already weak heart. Okay, so here we have all the same grammatical rules that we just saw earlier on here, okay? But they are now placed within a discourse context. So now how do you figure out, find out whether the students actually know these grammatical rules? Well, by answering these questions. Okay, so what's the answer to the first question? Will I play with my children today?
No.
No. Why? Because it says, I wish I could stay home, right? Which means that he can't. So he won't be able to stay home and play with the children. The second question, did I finish the project that I was working on?
No.
Did I finish it?
No.
No, because it says, I have to go to work to finish the project I've been working on all week, right? The third question, when did I start the project I was working on? You have to guess.
At the beginning of the week.
Probably, yeah, all week, all right? All right, all week. So it probably, I've been working on it all week, probably about a week ago. And then how much longer do you think it will take me to finish the project?
1 day.
1 day.
One more day.
Right. I would have been able to finish it yesterday, which means if nothing went wrong, I would have finished in one day. So I'm going today to finish it. So that will mean probably just one day. Now, what this does is it tries to bring in the same grammatical rules that you saw earlier on and put it into a discourse context. And what this does is, if the students are able to answer these questions, then also it assumes that they understand the grammar as well. Now, one of the things that we have done with the new center test, the Kyotsu test, or the common test, is we have gotten away, we have gotten rid of all the so-called grammar questions and the fill in the blanks questions. And we have only these reading comprehension, listening comprehension questions. And the main reason is because we want to try to get the students not simply to show their declarative knowledge of the structures, but we want to find out if they can use that declarative knowledge and cope with real content. And so what we've done in the new Kyotsu testo is we've inserted all of these grammatical items into the reading passages and to the listening passages. All right, so we've tried to get away from the declarative knowledge, and we have gone to the procedural knowledge. Okay, we want to see if the students can use it for real purpose. So we made a lot of changes in that sense. And the only way that you can get the students to go from declarative knowledge to procedural knowledge is not simply to practice the form again and again and again and again, like in pattern practice, but by giving the students an opportunity to use it in a meaningful context. The more the students are exposed to these structures in a meaningful context, the more the structures will become acquired as procedural knowledge. And that's what we want to try to do. And that's what we have been suggesting for the new course of study. Okay? Now, how do we do that? Well, the ministry has come up with the so-called idea of active learning. In the Gakushu Shido Yoryo, or the course of study, they talk about autonomous learning, interactive learning, and deep learning as being the three elements of active learning. Okay, these are the 3 points which are considered to be important for active learning to occur. Now, what is it exactly? Well, active learning is the overall term used to refer to learning which has as its goal the development of general human capacity, which includes cognitive, ethical, and social competence, as well as education and knowledge. This can be attained through discovery learning, problem-solving learning, experiential learning, and research. And in the classroom, group discussions, debates, group work are effective active learning procedures. It's through these procedures that the students will become more autonomous learners. They will be interacting with people to understand what is going on. And as a result, we hope that they will be saying, now I understand. Reach a deeper level of learning, okay? Another very important point is that for each of the subjects in the new course of study, there is a section which talks about the objectives. What do we mean by for example, in the case of English, communicating in a foreign language? That seems to be the goal, but what do we mean? What is it? What is important in this concept of communication? And this is a rough translation. All these are my own translations, very rough. In order to communicate in a foreign language, students must understand the foreign language and the culture on which it is based, of course, from the perspective of the society and the world in which they are living, which basically talks about in real life terms. And also another important point is right here, as well as in relation to the people with whom they are living. Communication is not something that can exist without true interaction with real people. And so what we want the students to be able to do is to understand each other through the process of communication. And as a result, if we are able to talk to each other and understand certain areas or certain things about that person that we did not know before, then we might say, oh, okay, so I understand them better now. In other words, we'll be able to restructure and reconstruct their ideas in accordance with the objectives and situations in which the communication event takes place. Restructure and reconstruct. I thought that guy was this kind of guy, but after having talked to him, now I know he's a little different. He has different ideas. And that's where the deep learning comes in. And that's the deep learning that they're talking about. So that's what the course of study defines as real communication. Not simply exchange of information. That's not enough. You got to go deeper than that. You have to go understand the person in a real context. Okay? Now, the new course of study, what does it look like? Let's start from listening comprehension. Okay? This side is what's written in the objectives. Basically, it basically says that for shogakko and for the chugakko, otogakko, here in the elementary school, to be able to speak, understand speech which is spoken very slowly and clearly, and if the content is about things which are related to their everyday lives, remember they're at level A. And in junior high school, they have to be able to understand materials which relate to some social issues, and they have to be able to come up with the gist, the general ideas. And in the same thing, but at a higher level, the senior high school students also have to understand the outline, the gist, as well as the main point of what they are hearing. Now that's, so the objectives which are written in the Gakushu Shidoyoryo are all based on things that they are supposed to be able to do. In other words, it's all based on procedural knowledge. These are the things that they have to be able to do. Now, how do you get them to do it? Language activities to develop these procedural knowledge. For example, to make this idea of everyday life, things which are related to their everyday life, more concrete, like being able to talk about friends and family, school life, and also using illustrations and actual pictures and so forth to understand the speech. Real context is necessary. In junior high school, very interesting, this is talking about listening comprehension, but in order to make sure that the students really have understood what they've heard, they have to be given a task of saying, all right, speaking what they think they heard. In other words, simply answering A, B, C, D, choosing one answer is not enough, because that can be done, without really thinking. But once a person says, all right, so you've heard this passage, now what can you summarize it? What do you think about it? The student has to really make sure that he is able to talk about the ideas that he thought he actually heard. So this is active learning. It's something that really will ensure that the student has understood what he's heard. Senior high school, the same thing, but more deeply, the student will have to be able to talk about what he's heard and also to write and summarize what he's heard. So this is listening comprehension, but it's already integration of skills. And this is very, very important. Okay, contextualization and integration of skills. The same thing with reading comprehension. I'm not going to go through this too much in detail, but as you can see, very similar things happen here. On the left-hand side, you have the objectives which are written, and they're all procedural knowledge. These are the things that the students should be able to do, not know, but be able to do. Okay, and in order to do this, the students have to do it in a very concrete context, and they have to be able to integrate the skills. Okay, so this is reading comprehension, but in junior high school, they have to be able to talk about what they read. And they have to give their opinions about whether or not they agree or not about what they've read. And senior high school, the same thing. They have to be able to write about what they've read as well. In other words, reading comprehension, but in order to make sure that they have been able to read the content correctly, they have to integrate the skills. So again, you have contextualization and integration of skills. Speaking, this is the interaction part. This, again, on the left-hand side is the procedure. On the right-hand side, you have the more concrete ways of making sure that you have understood the interaction that you've gone through. Especially in senior high school, the students have to really do some sort of an informal debate about certain topics. And then they have to summarize what they've learned. Here I have HOTS. This is the acronym for Higher Order Thinking Skills, right? So they have to be able to use these things as well, because they have to be able to talk about the reasons. They have to give evidence for what they are talking about, and they have to make sure that they agree or not agree with the other person, okay? So this is, in senior high school, this is the kind of things which are required for interaction. For production, which is speech, the same thing basically. The activities here also all talk about contextualization, integration, and higher level thinking skills. It also, in both the junior and senior high schools, they talk about, this is a speech, so they have to ask questions, Q&A sessions are necessary, and they have to be able to talk about what the other person, the person who gave the speech, mentioned, and they have to be able to summarize what the other person had said. And finally, in writing, okay? In elementary school, again, they have to be able to write about certain things which are very, very much related to their everyday lives. But one important thing about elementary school, and this goes with reading as well as in writing, is that students should not be forced to read or write anything that they have not understood orally. So everything that they are expected to be able to read and write, they have to have gone through the process of understanding it in an oral form. Okay, so reading and writing is not something which is independent of the oral skills. Oral skills have to be understood first. The oral skills have to be undergone first in order for the students to acquire or to learn the writing, okay, the written language, okay. And here in the senior high school for writing, it says peer reading, peer correction is something which is also being recommended. Making sure that the students are not simply writing and period and that's it, but they are sharing their ideas with other people as well. Asking questions and rewriting. These are all things which are listed in the new course of study. So as you can see, the emphasis has changed quite a lot from simply teaching the structure of the language to getting the students to really do communicative activities, okay? And so what we have to do is we have to try to get our students to do all of these different things, okay? So basically what we see here is this, okay? This is something which talks about the whole course of study. As a summary, it says that language and communication activities have to integrate all 5 areas and has to be taught globally. Can't be taught separately. Listening skills by itself, no. Listening skills cannot exist all by itself. It has to be integrated with other skills as well. Reading also has to be integrated. All of these things have to go together, and in order to get the students to acquire global skills. And also there has to be continuation. What the students have learned in elementary school has to be the basis for what the students will be learning in junior high school and so forth. And that's very, very important, because at the present time, there is very little connection between elementary school and junior high school, and even between junior high and senior high. Big gaps there. And we want to try to make sure that these gaps can be filled. Making sure that junior high school teachers will also understand what is being taught in the elementary schools and use those ideas as well in getting the students accustomed to what will be taught in junior high school. The same thing with senior high school teachers as well. Now, here I will talk about something which hopefully might help you to understand all of this in a more concrete sense. In the course of study for both junior and senior high school, and also in elementary school, 5th and 6th grade, there is a section which talks about language use situations and also language functions. So these are the situations. This here up here, these are more idiom-based situations. Okay, so greetings, self-introductions, talking on the phone, shopping, asking given directions, traveling, having meals. These are fixed script-based situations. And so all you need to do is get the students to acquire the kinds of idiomatic expressions which go along with these scripts. But down here, B is more important because it's wide open. In other words, students will have to be able to talk about their home life, their learning at school, activities at school, local events in their community, and so forth. Here, it's not simply, coming up with set fixed expressions, but they have to be able to use language in a communicative and more creative manner. And so B is, in a sense, requires more knowledge of how to use the language than A. A, basically idioms. B, having using the language in more creative ways. And what kinds of functions will be required? This all comes from junior high school, but here you have facilitating communication, asking repetition, repeating, etc., expressing emotions, gratitude, complaining, praising, apologizing, transmitting information, explaining, reporting, presenting, describing, expressing opinions and intentions, offering, promising, giving opinions, agreeing, and so forth, and stimulating a communication partner into action, like asking questions, requesting, inviting. Most of the basic kinds of functions which are necessary to conduct conversation is listed here. And these are supposed to be taught. And this begins in junior high school. And senior high school, this goes on. There are a few more things which are added as well. So you have the situation and you have these functions. You put these two together and you have a can do. And let me show you, okay? So, let's see, okay, so you have all of these. All right. For example, let's say we'll take one function, okay? I can express gratitude in English. All right, this is right here. Expressing gratitude right here, okay? Expressing gratitude. All right, so this is a very general kind of a can do. So what you want to do is you want to put this into a concrete context. And remember, all of these expressions have to be put in a concrete context. So for example, I can express gratitude when I receive something for my birthday. All right, so what would you say, anybody? You got something for your birthday. So what do you say? Any ideas?
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
Wow, this is fantastic.
Yeah, great. Okay. Any other opinions?
Oh, it's an amazing.
Okay. I mean, there are many, many different ways of saying it, right? But in school, in junior high school, for example, basically, thank you and thank you very much are the only things that are taught. I remember doing this with junior high school teachers, teacher training, and I asked them this very simple question. So, expressing gratitude on receiving birthday present, what would you say? And everybody said thank you or thank you very much. So I asked them, is there anything else you would say? And there was silence after that for a while. And it took them a while to think that it's okay to come up with something else. They didn't think that other expressions were being required here. Or I can express praise in English, okay? Or I can express agreement in English. Again, all of these things, all right? I agree or I disagree. I'd like to do it, okay? Now, there are some certain kinds of expressions that people talk about, but there are so many different types of answers which are possible, all right? Expressing gratitude. How did you know it was my birthday? Or I always wanted this. There are so many different ways of saying these things in a more indirect manner, right? Expressing refusal in English also, okay? It's not a one-to-one situation. There are many different ways of saying these things. But then you come across something like this, inviting people to go to the zoo on a beautiful day. What would you say? How would you invite the person? What would you say? Anybody? It's a beautiful day. That's so you want to take that person to the zoo. What would you say? How would you invite the person?
Hey, you want to go to the zoo?
Yeah, okay. Anybody else?
It's a great day. Let's go to the zoo.
Okay, it's a great day. Let's go to the zoo. Anything else? Some people might say, by the way, do you like animals? That could be an invitation to go to the zoo as well, right? But in Japan, you have to fill in the slots 1, 2, and 3 in order to get full marks. All right. Anything else is considered wrong. In other words, this is where the accuracy comes in. This is where the structural syllabus comes in. Knowledge of the language comes in. There's very little freedom on the part of the students to be more creative and to talk about to say the kinds of things that he or she wants to say. Okay. Right. So in trying to think about this, there are 3 levels that we as teachers have to think about. The first one is the general can-do objectives. These will be the objectives which are listed in the course of study. Okay, so you come up with one of these, and it might be, say, something like, I can express my own thoughts and feelings using English. Okay, that's a very general can-do objective. But then you say, in what situation? And so the specific can-do is the actual situation in which this general can-do can be realized. So let's say I can talk about my field trip and my impressions about it. All right, and that's the actual situation. So once this is set, then you come up with the content and the skills which might be necessary in order to realize these objectives. Expository discourse, I think, I feel. These are expressions that you'll probably have to use. Descriptive, especially when you're talking about trips and so forth. And also narrative discourse, what happened in sequence of time. And also basic expressions about traveling, idioms, and also conjunctions in order to create the discourse. So what is necessary is, first of all, to understand the general objective written in the course of study. Then come up with actual concrete activities in order to try to get the students to acquire these skills, this objective. And then we think about the kinds of linguistic elements which might be necessary for them to actually do this activity. And so these are the 3 major levels of activities or aspects, factors that people have to think about in trying to get the students to do these different activities. Actually, in workshops that I actually do, I have people in groups actually come up with these can-dos, specific objectives, and so forth. But here, online, that's very difficult to do, so I won't be able to do it. So this is the kind of framework that I usually give. The can-do statement, okay, which one did you choose? So what kind of concrete activity have you chosen? And also, what kinds of linguistic knowledge and skills do you think will be necessary to get the students to do this, to acquire these can-dos in this kind of activity, okay? So that's what I have been doing. Now, I'm going to ask a little question, and I don't know how many people are still with me here, but I'd like you to very simply answer this question, okay? It's a very simple question, all right? All right, everybody, what's this? What's this?
Watch.
Watch.
It's a watch, very good. Okay, repeat after me, watch. It's a watch.
It's a watch.
The watch.
Okay, is this a watch?
Yes.
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 Yes, it is,
This is
okay?
a watch.
All right, repeat after me, yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it
Yes, it is.
Okay, and this is doing pattern practice, drill exercises, okay? Now, if you were to go to, for example, Nagoya Station or somewhere where it's real crowded, and as you're walking with your friend in this very crowded, let's say, a station, and one of you takes off his or her watch, and you show the other person your watch and say, "What's this?" in a crowded place. It sounds very awkward, right?
Right.
Very awkward. And also, is this a watch? Will be very awkward too, because you're holding this watch, right? And more awkward would be repeat after me in a crowded place. All right? That would be very, very strange, wouldn't it? But that's the way we teach English. So if there's something there that have to make us think whether or not what we're doing with our students is really meaningful for them. Well, now let's take a look at another picture. I want you to answer this again the way you want, a very simple yes/no question. Okay, you know what this is. All right, so do you like cats?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
No. I
Okay,
don't.
no, yes, well, maybe I used to, whatever. Many different kinds of answers possible, right?
Right.
So remember here, I said, what's this? This is a watch, right? Now, what's this? This is a cat, okay? Is this a watch? Yes, it is. It's a yes/no question. Do you like cats? Yes, I do. No, I don't. It's a yes/no question. Now you go again to Nagoya Station and you're walking with your friend and suddenly you say to your friend, oh, by the way, do you like cats? That sounds strange? It doesn't sound strange, does it?
Yeah.
But if you say, by the way, is this a watch? It sounds strange, doesn't it?
Right.
All right. So now what's the difference between is this a watch and is this a cat? Or I mean, not is this a cat, but do you like cats? Now, the major difference is in what people call display versus referential questions. Okay. So display questions are questions in which the person who asked the questions already knows the answer. So I'm not asking you whether you know what this object is, which is a watch, because I already know that is a watch. But what I want to do is to try to make sure that you understood what I taught you about this structure. Okay, so making sure, confirming that you have acquired the structure that I taught. Also, if I said, is this a watch? And I showed you the watch and somebody said, no, it isn't, I could say you're wrong because it is a watch, right? However, if I said, do you like cats? And somebody said, yes, I do, but I didn't like cats, could I say you're wrong? No. Referential questions, these are meaningful questions. Referential questions have no right or wrong answer. Display questions, because the answer is already fixed, always has a yes or no, or a right or wrong answer, okay? Another important thing is that in the case of display questions, the answers are limited. Okay, you can only say yes or no. And it's already predetermined. But for referential questions, like do you like cats, you can answer any way you want. In other words, the choice is unrestricted. Now here's another question. This is a display question. The answer is already known to me. And it's a yes/no question. I'm going to ask you this question, okay? All right. So I will simply ask you to answer yes or no. Ready? Does the sun rise from the west?
No.
No, it doesn't.
Why did it take you so long to answer this question? It didn't take you very long to answer. Is this a watch? What happened there? There's only one answer, right?
Right, there's only one answer. Why? I'm not sure. That one I always forget which one it is. I know in my, yeah, I don't know. I don't know why.
In other words, you have to think, right?
Yeah, you got to think about it for a minute.
Right. In other words, you have to think about the answer. And that's where the quizzes come in. The quizzes are really, really effective because quizzes already have answers, but the students have to think about it. And although you have these display questions and display activities, if you get the students to think, then it becomes interesting. It becomes interesting. And also another point is the use of realia. Okay, let me show you this, okay? Let's take a textbook here, and you have John and Mike, okay? Any textbook. All right, so the question is, who's taller, John or Mike? And the answer is? Who's taller?
John.
John.
John. Right, John is taller. Now let me ask you a question. Who's John? How old is he? You know where he lives? Have you met him before? So you're saying John is taller than Mike. Then do you know Mike? You don't know him either? And you're saying John is taller than Mike, which means what? You're simply practicing form, right? There is no meaning here. But if I asked you a very different question, who is taller, Pikachu or Doraemon? You know Pikachu?
Mm.
Yeah, you know Doraemon? Who's taller? Anybody?
Doraemon.
No.
I think Doraemon.
You think Doraemon? Yeah, you are right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. You all know Pikachu. You all know Doraemon, right? This is meaningful, right? On the left-hand side, John and Mike, you don't know them, so it's not meaningful at all. It's just practicing the form. But once you put something meaningful in here, you know it becomes more meaningful. As you can see,
Oh,
Pikachu is
perfect.
about 40 centimeters tall. Doraemon, 129.3 centimeters tall. Okay. All right, now here's another one. Huh? This is, you can do this with anybody. You probably, many of you know this. It comes from the trick art used in psychology a lot. Okay. All right, so what's this? These are the words that you might use. What's this part here?
Hair.
It's a hair, okay. What's this part? What's this?
Head?
What's this?
Scarf.
It's a scarf, but underneath the scarf, you see what is it? Head,
Head.
okay. And then what's this?
Ear.
Eye.
Ear, right?
Oh,
Ear.
eye or
Or eye.
ear, right? Those of you who said eye, is this an old person or a young person?
Old.
Old. For those of you who said ear, how old is this person?
Young.
Young, huh? Right? Okay, so, and what is this?
Chin.
Chin or
Nose.
nose, right? All right, it can be a nose of the old lady. And if you go down here, what is this?
Chin.
Chin of the old lady.
Lady or the neck of the young lady, right? Now, it's fun to try to get the students to guess, all right? And then they have to, and then you ask them, why? Why is this the chin? Why is this the neck? Why is this such and such? Get the students to think about it. The answers are all there. It's not difficult at all, but you get, and it's not a very difficult question at all. It's a quiz, but it's fun because they have to think about it. Try another one. At first glance, what do you see? You don't have to look at the writing on the right-hand side. What do you see?
Face.
A face?
Yeah, face.
Face.
Yeah, that's what I saw. But then I read this and it said, can you see the spelling liar?
Liar.
Right, you see liar? Okay. In other words, this isn't, right, you see this again, huh? All right, this is also kind of a trick art, huh? All right, so again, yeah, you get the students to discuss. Why is it a liar? Well, look over here, you know? How about this? How old do you think she is? About 20 years old, 40 years old, 80 years old. Okay, so how old do you think she is? Anybody?
Ready?
She looks what?
80.
80?
8.
Okay,
Yeah, but
look.
20.
You see the young lady? Okay. Again, what you're doing is you're trying to get the students to think. Very simple questions, but you're getting them to guess and to discuss. Why? Why do you think she's 80 years old? Why do you think she's about 20 or 30, 40 years old? Huh? Let me try one more. Now this might be a little difficult. This is the picture of an animal. You know what it is? I'll give you some hints. It lives on a farm. It gives us meat. And it gives us milk. Anybody guess?
I guess it's a cow, but I don't see it.
You don't see the cow though, huh? Okay. Watch closely.
Oh, there he is.
You see the cow?
Yeah, there we go.
instead of
Oh.
that. Okay. All right. For those of you who might not have seen it, okay. So if you turn this around this way, you see the cow.
Wow.
You see. Now these are simple things. I use trick art sometimes when I teach psycholinguistics on the undergraduate level. I do this a lot. Trying to get them to think in different ways, all right? Not just to think in one way. Okay, so anyway, sorry I took up the whole time, but if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to comment on, that's fine with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Now we have to break 15 minutes for 15 minutes, and then the second speaker, Dr. Hines, will talk about from 3:15 to 4:45. So if you want to stay to talk to Dr. Yoshida, it could be fine. And you, of course, you can grab the coffee and then go to toilet. It's up to you. Okay, but again, with our respect, and then could you show a live big hand to Dr. Yoshida? Thank you very much, Yoshida Sensei.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Can I ask a question to Professor
Yep.
Yoshida?
Yes, please,
Yeah.
please.
Because in Japan there are two courses of study. Of course, there's the Monbusho course of study.